Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is the first episode of the Percy Jackson series. Now don't get mad at me if I mispronounce words or stumble up my words. I have dyslexia too, so don't blame me. Now let's get started. The Lightning Thief, Percy Jackson the Olympians, Book 1 by Rick Riordan. Chapter 1. I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom and dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary and most of the time gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great. Read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding school student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a trouble kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it. But things really started going bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading for Metropolis Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were, but Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and scruffy beard and frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think that he'd be cool but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hoped this trip would be okay. At least I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happened to me on field trips, like my 5th grade school. When we went to Scarcoa battlefield, I had this accident with the Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course, I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk and our class took an unpleasant swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bullfist, the freckly, red-headed, kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of that, he was crippled. He had a nose excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny and every step hurt him. But don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was an enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bullfish was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair. And she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. That headmaster threatened me with death by in-school suspension. Anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm gonna kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay, I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it! I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who will get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wished I decked Nancy Bullfish right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big, echoey galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big sphinx on the top and started telling us how it was a grave martyr, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the side. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of entertaining. But everyone around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher was chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley around right in your locker. She had come to Yancey halfway through the year when our math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodd loved Nancy Bullfish and figured I was the devil's spawn. She would point to her crooked finger at me and said, "Now, honey," real sweet, and I knew I was going to get out of school detention for a month. One time, she made me erase answers out of an old math workbook until midnight. I told Grover I didn't think Miss Dodds was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Bullfish snickered around something about a naked guy on steel, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" The whole group laughed, and Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson, did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the steel. "Perhaps you can tell us what this picture represents." I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. "That's Kronos eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, awfully not satisfied. "And he did this because, well," I racked my brain to remember. "Kronos was the king god and God?" Mr. Brunner asked. "Titan," I corrected myself, "and he didn't trust his kids who were gods. So Kronos ate them, right? But his wife had hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad Kronos into barfing up his brothers and sisters." "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. "And so there was a big fight between the gods and the Titans, and the gods won." Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bullfish mumbled to a friend, "Like we're gonna use this in real life. Like it's gonna say on our job application, please explain why Kronos ate his kids." "And why, Mr. Jackson, to paraphrase Miss Bowman's excellent question, doesn't matter in real life?" "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got packed too. Mr. Brunner wasn't the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about his question and I shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "I see." Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. "Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disorderate his 500 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods had defeated their father and sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, and scattered the remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lodge. Miss Dodds, would you lead us back outside?" The class drifted off. The girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow, and Mr. Brunner said, "Mr. Jackson." I knew that was coming, and I told Grover to keep going, and I turned to Mr. Brunner. "Sir?" Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go, and intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. "You must learn the answer to my question," Mr. Brunner told me. "About the Titans?" "About real life, how your studies apply to it." "Oh, what you must learn from me is vitally important, and I expect you to treat it as such. I will only expect the best from you, Percy Jackson." I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed as a suit of Roman armor and shouted, "What ho!" and challenged us sword point against chalk to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who ever lived and their mother and what god they worship. But Mr. Brunner expecting me to be as good as everyone else, despite the fact I had dyslexia and attention deflect disorder, and I had never made above a C in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. I couldn't just learn all those names and facts, must thus spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder. Mr. Burner took one long, sad look at the steel he had been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum. We could watch the foot traffic along the Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, the clouds blacker than I've ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We've had this massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfire, lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeon with Lunchable crackers. Nancy Bullfit was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's purse, and of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everyone wouldn't know that we were from that school, the school for loser freaks who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, not from Brunner. I wish he'd lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep physiological comment to make me feel better, he said, "Can I have your apple?" I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched a stream of cabs going down Fifth Avenue and thought about my mom's apartment, only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She sent me right back to Yancey, remind me that I had to try harder, even if this was my sixth school within 6 years. I was probably going to get kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that sad look she gave me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. The red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bullfitch appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she has got tired of stealing from the tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if someone had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The school counselor told me a million times, count to 10, get control of your temper, but I was so mad my mind was blank. A wave roared in my ears. I don't remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt and found screaming, "Percy, push me!" Mrs. Dodds materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see the water like it grabbed her?" I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew is that I was in trouble again. As soon as Mrs. Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, promising to get her a new shirt at the museum gift shop, etc., etc., Mrs. Dodds turned on me. There was a triumph fire in her eyes. I had done something she'd been waiting for all semester. "Now, honey." I know, a month's racing workshop. That wasn't the right thing to say. "Come with me." "Wait, it was me. I pushed her." I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Mrs. Dodds scared Grover to death. She glared at him so hard that his whiskery chin trembled. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood," she said, "but you will stay here." Miss Grover looked at me desperately. "It's okay, man," I told him. "Thanks for trying." "Honey," Mrs. Dodds barked at me. "Now." Mrs. Nancy Bullfist smirked. I gave her my deluxe "I'll kill you later" stare. Then I turned to face Mrs. Dodds, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way at the top of the stairs, gesturing impatiently for me to come on. How did she get there so fast? I have moments like that a lot, when my brain falls asleep or something, and the next thing I know, I miss something, as if a puzzle piece fell out of the universe, left me staring at the blank place behind it. The school counselor told me this was part of my ADHD, my brain misinterpreting things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Mrs. Dodds. Halfway up the steps, I glanced back at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner like he wanted Mr. Brunner to know what was going on. Mrs. Brunner was absorbed in his novel. I looked back up and Mrs. Dodds had disappeared again. She was now inside the building at the end of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought. She's going to make me buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop. Apparently, that wasn't the plan. I followed her deeper into the museum, and when I finally caught up to her, we were right back at the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Miss Dodds stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frieze of the Greek gods. She was making this a weird noise in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird being alone with a teacher, especially Mrs. Dodds. Something about the way she looked at the frieze, as if she wanted to pulverize it. "You've been giving us a problem, honey," she said. "I did the safe thing," I said. "Yes, ma'am." She tugged on the cuffs of her leather jacket. "Did you really think you would get away with it?" The look in her eye was beyond mad. It was evil. She's a teacher, I thought nervously. It's not like she's gonna hurt me. I said, I'll try harder, man." Thunder shook the building. "We aren't fools, Percy Jackson. It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess, and you will suffer less pain." I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was that my teachers must have found the illegal stash of candy I had been selling out of my dorm room, or maybe they realized I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book. And now they were going to take away my grade, or worse, they were going to make me read the book. "Well," she demanded. "Ma'am, I don't. Your time is up," she hissed. The weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into a large, leathery wings. She wasn't human. She was a shriveled hag with bat wings and claws and a mouthful of yellow fangs. And she was about to slice me to ribbons. Then things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who'd been out inside the museum went before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. "What ho, Percy!" he shouted, and tossed the pen through the air. Mrs. Dodds lunged at me. With a yelp, I dodged, but felt talons slash the air next to my ear. I snatched the bobble pen out of the air. When it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Bronze's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament day. Mrs. Dodds spun towards me with a murderous look in her eyes. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the sword. She snarled, "Die, honey," and she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. I did the only thing that came naturally. I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her shoulder and passed clean through her body, if she was made of water. Hiss. Mrs. Dodd was a sandcastle in a power fan. She exploded into yellow powder, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and a dying screech and the chill of evil in the air, as if those two glowing red lights were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Brunner was there? Nobody was there but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been compensated with magic mushrooms or something. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back outside. It had started to rain. Grover was sitting by the fountain, the museum mat tented over his head. Nancy Bullfist was standing there, soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her ugly friends. When she saw me, she said, "I hope Miss Kerr worked your butt." I said, "Who? Our teacher? Duh." I blinked. We had no teacher named Mrs. Kerr. I asked Nancy what she was talking about. She just rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Mrs. Dodds was. He said, "Who?" He paused first, and he wouldn't look at me, so I thought he was messing with me. Not funny, man. This is serious. Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella reading his book as if he never moved. I went over with him. He looked a little distracted. "That'll be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson." I handed Mr. Brunner his pen. I hadn't even realized that I was holding it. "Sir," I said, "where's Mrs. Dodds?" He stared at me blankly. "Who?" "The other chaperone, Miss Dodds, the pre-algebra teacher." He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. "Percy, there is no Mrs. Dodds on this trip, and as far as I know, there has never been Mrs. Dodds at Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right?"